Hi, we're here again with another Kentucky author, this time Ann Gabhart of Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. And many of you library patrons in Owen County know Ann and her books. And we're delighted to have her talk about her newest books and anything else she wants to talk about. So welcome, Ann. Thanks for being with us.
Well, it's so glad to be here. I love talking about books, and I enjoy talking to people who love books. And most library patrons do enjoy a good story. And without a library, I probably wouldn't be a writer today. But when I was a little girl, my mom always made sure we got to go to the library and pick out books. And then when I first wrote my first book back, oh, it's been a long time ago. My first book was published in 1978. I had this wonderful librarian who was so helpful with everything I wanted to research when I started doing historical fiction. Most of my books, almost all of them, have a Kentucky setting. Even if I don't mention the setting, it's still pretty much Kentucky because I'm a Kentucky girl, and that's what I know. I like writing about small towns. I grew up near a small town. I'm a farm girl. I grew up on a farm, not too far out of town, but it is out in the country. And when I was a little girl, I read a lot of Hardy Boy books, and I loved the Hardy Boy mysteries. And I thought, wow, what fun it would be if I could solve a mystery like the Hardy Boys. Now, I never wanted to be a Hardy Boy. I wanted to be a Hardy girl. And so I wrote my own book starring myself and my cousin and my sister. They were my chums, and we were trying to solve mysteries here on the farm, and we played with that for several years. And then I sort of outgrew that, writing that novel in my little wire-bound notebooks, and I started writing little short stories like a teenager might consider at the age. And then I got married very young and had a couple of kids by the time I was 19, but I never lost that dream to someday actually have a published something. And to begin with, I was writing short pieces, sold them to church magazines, and they were sort of slice of life about how I was, my kids were doing or something like that. And so eventually I took this course, a writing course, and the last lesson in the writing course was to write an outline for a novel. Well, I had never liked writing outlines in school, and so I decided to write the novel instead. And when I did, I discovered that that's the kind of writing I really enjoyed doing. I liked being able to stay with the same characters and follow the same people on through the story. Well, I had some good years, and I've had some years that I didn't sell so many, but in 2005, I published my first inspirational novel, Scent of Lilacs. It was sort of based on what I remember the 1960s being like in my little small town. So I have a young girl and her preacher dad, who's also a newspaper editor, and their family, and lots of fun in that series. I call it my Heart of Holly Hill series. You got the Scent of Lilacs and Orchard of Hope and Summer of Joy. And after I wrote that, I was looking around for a new idea, and so I thought, well, I've written about what I remember in my younger days. So now I'm going to write about my mom's memories, because my mom grew up during the Great Depression, and she and her sisters would get together and they would laugh and have such fun talking about their memories of those days when they grew up in this little community and all the odd characters that they knew. I mean, what small community didn't have a few odd characters? So I decided to take a couple of those odd characters and use my mom's background for a new series of books. And the first one of those was called Angel Sister. And then we had Small Town Girl and Love Comes Home. Well, then I wrote a lot of Shaker books. I don't know whether you all are interested in Shakers, but the Shakers are a very unique sect that had two villages in Kentucky. They had one in Mercer County, which is near me, Pleasant Hill, and then they have one in Auburn, Kentucky, that was called South Union. Well, I took the history that I had read about, well, I read history about all the Shaker villages, but I used the setting of Pleasant Hill in my books. I've got a fictional Shaker Village called Harmony Hill. And I've written 8 books now, I think, set in my Harmony Hill Shaker Village. And the last book I've had published is actually The Refuge. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see that.
It's
But
good.
this is my most recent published book. And it's about a couple that go to the Shaker Village because there is a new cholera epidemic threatening in their countryside, and their family had been impacted by earlier cholera epidemics. So they decide to join the Shaker Village till the cholera scare is over, because the Shaker Villages never had cholera. And that was because they had clean water. But at that time, nobody knew exactly what caused cholera. And so a lot of times they just thought it was bad air. They thought it was caused because people threw their vegetable peelings out and different things in the summertime. And that made bad air in the towns. And so a lot of times people would just try to get away from the bad air. Of course, if they already had cholera, it's sort of like our pandemic now. If they already had the germ, they were probably just spreading it into the new places that they went. So I did also write a book that's a lot more about the cholera epidemic called River to Redemption. In that book, it's set in 1833 when there was a terrible cholera epidemic all across the world, but here in the United States too. And thousands of people, and perhaps millions of people, died from cholera. Cholera was a terrible disease because it could kill a whole family. It was caused by unclean water, and so of course the family probably was drinking the same water. In my story, I came across this story about a slave in 1833 named Louis Sansbury, and his owner owned a hotel, and when he heard about the cholera epidemic, he gave Louis his keys and told him to keep things going back in Springfield, Kentucky. Well, Louis was one of those rare individuals that was, for some reason or other, not affected by the cholera. And so instead of maybe taking advantage of everybody being out of town or whatever, and maybe running for his own freedom, he stayed in Springfield and took care of the people that were sick, that didn't have anybody to take care of them. And then when they died, he buried them. He buried 55 people in that summer of 1833 that died of cholera in Springfield, Kentucky. About 12 years later, Louis's owner dies, and his heirs are going to sell Louis for the money that they might make off of him. So the town, in remembering what Louis had done for them by burying their loved ones, they took up money and bought Louis's freedom and set him up in a blacksmith shop. Well, that was the inspiration for my story, River to Redemption. I made up a story about how that might have happened. My story is not true, but that nugget of truth about Louis is the basis of, or the inspiration for my story. If you want to read about a pandemic, then cholera is a good pandemic to read about.
It sounds like
So,
it's a great story.
I've had a lot of other work.
It's a great story of how we're all in this together too, and which is our motto now as we go through this pandemic ourselves. Thank you for telling that story, Ann. That's really lovely, and I'm sure our listeners our readers are going to be interested in hearing it. You can get a lot of Ann's books on our Overdrive and Libby. They are available there, and they're also available in ebook form on Amazon, right? When the library opens,
Right.
we have hardback copies, but we have to wait until we can all get back into the library. So I want to thank you for being with us, Ann, and I hope that we'll have you in person to the library, possibly in the fall. Thank you so much.
Well, maybe then I'll be able to talk. Maybe then I can talk about my new release, which comes out in the end of June, called An Appalachian Summer. And it has frontier nursing history. So I'm sure a lot of people in your community will be interested in hearing that. I have
Absolutely.
the book already, These Healing Hills, that has your nursing service. So it'll be sort of a continuation of that history. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have to have you back so you can talk about that. It sounds great. Thanks a lot, Ann. Bye.
Bye-bye.